Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I thought I would share with you some pioneer stories from Kansas. And these are a few stories about the crazy weather they had during the pioneer times. And these are true stories as told by some of the pioneers. For Emma Mitchell New and her growing family, life on the plains of central Kansas was far from easy. Over the years, they suffered one heartache after another in a seemingly endless struggle against fire, drought, Indians, blizzards, and even death. Yet through it all, Emma would not give in to the perils and privations surrounding her. Without remorse or self-pity, she never ceased to fight the odds. A devastating flood was one of her worst trials. A terrible storm and cloudburst came upon us, and we lost almost everything, except the cows and an old team in the pasture. It came on the 23rd of July. We had a nice cow barn put up, and that day they came up a stack of millet, the whole length of the barn. It commenced to rain in the afternoon, but in due time we started the children to town with the milk. It was a general downpour, and the creeks were commencing to rise. So my husband started out to meet the children and get them home in safety. My husband said to the children, "We will be good to the ponies tonight and put them in the cow barn and give them some nice millet." They hadn't been in the house very long before we discovered our cellar was full of water from the outside door, and the well curb and the toilet were gone. The creek was up to the house, and still pouring down. My husband investigated and found that the underpinnings of the house was going, and that we had to get out. We took a lantern and matches and some blankets, and started for the side hills. When we opened the door to get out, the water came up to our necks. We had a struggle to get out, and I can't tell to this day how we ever made it, but the Lord must have been with us. My husband carried the baby girl in his arms as high as his head. We soon got out of the deepest water, as there was a turn in the creek. We went by way of the horse stable and found we would be safe in it. Still the water was up, and it was pitch dark. The matches were wet, so we couldn't light the lantern. We stayed there until the storm abated and the water went down. Then we started out to see if we had a home left, and to our delight, even in such a mess, we found it still standing. It was still dark, and we couldn't see what havoc the storm had made for us. We found some dry matches and lit the lamp. Such a deplorable sight words cannot express. We couldn't shut the door when we left the house, so the kitchen was full of rubbish, and everything had been swimming in the high water. Many things were upside down. When the water went down, there was an inch of mud all over the carpets and floors. When daylight came, it was a sad sight to behold. Our cow barn and ponies were swept away, also our stack of millet. Practically everything we had was gone or ruined. Machinery, wagons, and nice garden. Back of the house was a nice patch of potatoes, but it washed them out clean, and the soil as far as ever you plowed. Our ponies washed downstream about 16 miles to the Saline River before lodging. When they were found, they were still tied to the same ridge pole. We did not have much to eat for breakfast. As well, our food and groceries were in a cupboard in the kitchen, and everything was ruined in the cellar. Even the water was not fit to drink. And the next part I will read is about a blizzard. A winter blizzard was an awesome spectacle. Without warning, dark, billowing clouds roared across the skies and unleashed blinding bursts of snow. They came with a mighty blast, recalled one witness, sweeping with almost the strength of a cyclone, raking the life of stock and sometimes human beings. Isolated in its cabin, the Frontier family braced itself against onslaughts of ice and snow. Wrapped in heavy overcoats, thick woolen blankets, they huddled around the fireplace for warmth. "As I sit here today," wrote Josephine Middlecoff, "and look at the snowdrifts, and think of the two drifts of earlier days, there are mere make-believes after a blizzard would rage for 48 hours or more. with nothing on the prairies in the way of houses, barns, or fences to hold the snow. It had a clean sweep into town and pile up against wood piles, barns, and fences 6 and 8 feet deep. Communication with the outside world would be completely cut off. For 10 days and 2 weeks at a time, all traffic would be tied up until 200 or 300 men could dig an opening through the snow that would be drifted full without the protection of snow fences. For Ari Johnson's family, the nightmare of one sudden blizzard was not easily forgotten. According to one daughter, New Year's morning in the year 1886 gave the promise of being one of the lovely days of western Kansas. But about 1 o'clock, the clouds began to darken the skies, and by night were very heavy, snowflakes beginning to fall very lightly at about 6 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock everyone realized that the country was in the grips of a terrible blizzard, the wind blowing a gale, the snow coming in a blinding rush. By morning, nothing could be seen. In order to care for the stock in the barns, it was necessary to draw a rope from the house to the barn. The cold was so intense that the fires had to be kept going in the house day and night, and many people suffered from lack of provisions and fuel. This continued for 4 days. Cattle on the range could not be cared for, and it was not possible to search for them until after the 4th day of the storm. Losses were extremely heavy, and searchers would find them frozen to death, some with their mouths frozen shut, some with their feet frozen. It was only with the greatest difficulty that progress could be made through the large drifts, and men on horses were frequently compelled to get off, make their way as best they could through the drifts, and then pull the horses to them by a rope previously tied to their heads. The snow made everything look alike, and it was only by the aid of familiar posts or fences that one was able to keep from getting lost. A week after the storm, searchers saw steam coming from a drift and found 100 head of cattle that were in good shape. All that was left of a bunch of 500. The November 16th blizzard of 1871 roared abruptly out of an unusually warm autumn sky. Caught unaware, the settlers awakened to a magnificent onslaught of snow that continued to bury the countryside for 3 long days. Helpless travelers caught in the gale were blinded by driving snow and quickly lost their way. Among them was a young English bride on a honeymoon hunting expedition. Annie Gilkson, writing in 1908, described the desperate plight of the plucky bride. We called her Stormy Petal to designate the manner of her coming to us, although the warmth and sweetness of her disposition forbade the thought that anything rough than a sunbeam had ever crossed her path. Slight, petite, yet of perfectly molded form, dark eyes and light hair, she was indeed most charming in appearance. Until the time we made her acquaintance, her history had been as follows. Born in Merry, England, the daughter of a prosperous manufacturer, she had received all the advantages which wealth can bestow, and was in consequence a thoroughbred gentleman woman. Her father unfortunately fell victim to drink, and the family, a large one, soon found themselves in straitened circumstances. Our heroine was a brave little woman, so she resolved to strike out for herself into the world in company with 2 brothers who had planned to seek their fortunes in America. The early spring of 1871 found them in sunny Kansas, this state offering them alluring prospects, especially in the line of climate. Farming seemed to them an ideal mode of occupation, involving little labor, and no knowledge of the subject whatever, the modus operandi being simply to scratch the ground, drop in a seed, and allow the climate to do the rest. About 100 miles inside the state, they located 3 claims, built a rude little house on the bare prairie, and proceeded to farm. Our little lady was as well versed in the duties of a housekeeper as were her brothers in the wiles of agriculture. Altogether they made sad work of it. She, however, had a faculty of accomplishing whatever she set her mind to, and was resolved to profit by practice. Well, our young Englishmen tilled the soil according to their light. They scratched the ground and planted the seed, then sat down on the shady side of the house to smoke their pipes and watch the crops grow. The winds blew, the sun shone, but the rain came not, neither did the crops. About this time there appeared on the scene another young Briton. He also had heard of the fame of Kansas, and over in Old England as well. His coming was hailed with delight by our homesick young friends, and they gladly made him welcome. It was a pleasure even to talk about the cool, shady lanes of dear old England, when here the soil was parched and baked by the wind and sun. Before many weeks had passed, the little Cupid had decided that there must be a pair. Petrel became a bride. When autumn came, the hope of a fortune reaped from bountiful harvest was dead in each heart. From further west, however, came the report of buffalo, which swarmed the plains. A cruel slaughter of the beasts was then being carried on both for pleasure and profit. It afforded royal sport for such men as the Duke Alexis of Russia, who was here that winter. Our young friends became inflamed with new zeal. They would yet win their fortunes, and in a way congenial to their tastes, for hunting is a sport dear to Englishmen. They disposed of everything not necessary to a camping outfit, and early in November started out. The weather was warm and balmy, such weather as only Kansas can show at this season. Petel still accompanied the party, making her bridal trip, one sweet lady attending by 3 chivalrous knights. It was like a merry picnic party, all remembrance of failure blotted out by the high hopes which ran riot in each youthful heart. Fox hunting in Old England was a mere bagatelle in comparison to the grand sport they were going to have in hunting such big game, and then for profit too. Petrel, being a true sportswoman, entered heartily into all of the enthusiasm, and although she knew she could not partake of the actual hunt, she could at least keep the camp and share their triumphs. They enlivened their way by snatches of song and merry jests, and many of the beauties of old homeland, which had hitherto been so poignant, faded into oblivion. They could even be thankful that its rain and fog were not present to mar the comfort of the smooth, hard ground over which they traveled. Suddenly, in the midst of all their mirth, they noticed a small, fleecy cloud passing over the sun. This was speedily joined by other innocent-appearing little clouds, and a chill came into the summer air. Petel donned her netty little jacket, and the men turned up their collars. The singing ceased, however, and they moved quickly on, anxiously watching the sky and the ever-thickening gloom. After a time, some little flecks of snow drifted lazily down, melting as soon as they touched ground. Our party laughed at this, for the season was not yet far enough advanced to bring forth any serious storm, and two, the land agents had assured them that Kansas never had any severe winter. The snow continued to fall, but in the same gentle manner. Presently they came in sight of a long, straggling line of treetops, which marked the trend of a little stream. Night was coming on, so they concluded to pitch their camp on the banks of this creek. In the morning this flurry of snow would be gone, and they could pursue their way rejoicing. After preparing some supper as best they could in the steadily falling snow, they made camp as comfortably as possible and retired to rest, fully expectant to see a clear sky on awakening. During the night the air became freezing cold, the snow fell yet more thickly, and the wind blew in fierce gusts. When morning broke and our friends looked out from their beds of uneasy slumber, the wind was blowing a gale, and they found themselves nearly buried in snow. To prepare any breakfast was a physical impossibility. So, having observed the evening before a little town about a mile from where they camped, they decided to strike for it and obtain supplies. By some strange process of reasoning, they concluded that it was safer to have Petal remain where she was than to risk the journey. Tucking her into the wagon as snugly as possible, they bade her be brave until their speedy return. It was with great difficulty that they made their way through the drifted snow into the town. Several hours passed in the accomplishment of this feat. They supplied their wants as speedily as possible, and then started on the return journey, fearful that, by this time, Petal might be suffering with cold. But man proposes and God disposes. They had reckoned without their bearings. The wind, having increased its fury each moment, seemed to come from every quarter of the globe at once. It swirled about them with push and power, driving the cutting, blinding snow into their faces, so that they could see only a few feet ahead of them. They fought the baffling snow with desperate courage for the entire day, and when night came on, they had not yet found their camp. Heartsick and weary, they realized that it would be futile to continue in the darkness and the still raging storm, and guided by the lights, returned to the little village, traveling in a circle, as lost people usually do. They were not far from it. Very early the next morning they motioned their tired horses and resumed the search. The storm had by this time abated, but they were almost crazed by the fear that Petal would be found frozen to death. And how had it fared with her during that long and weary hours of day and night? As the wind grew colder, she drew around her all the covering she could find. As the day wore on and her rescuers did not return, she satisfied her hunger with a few biscuits she could reach. For drink, she had only to put out her hand and gather a little snow. What her feelings were during all this terrible day and night can better be imagined than described. She was a courageous little woman, but she knew the country around her to be infested with Indians. What if they could find her before her own loved ones could and carry her off? She was becoming numb with cold in her cramped position, and when at last the morning dawned again, she found herself completely buried in the snow. She had no fancy for a premature burial, so proceeded to dig herself out. By climbing on some boxes in the wagon, she was able to get her head and shoulders above the snow. Then, like Noah's dove, she looked forth for a place to land. All around her was a smooth, unbroken surface of snow. Nowhere could she see a place to put her foot. She knew that, as the wagon was buried out of sight, it devolved upon her to do something to make her whereabouts known. So she put a red scarf on the end of an umbrella and hoisted her flag of distress. Some hours later, this is what the searchers spied. At the sound of their shouts, a curly head soon appeared beside the flag, and the shout became a joyful cry. Very soon they had broken a way through a heavy drift, and had the numbed and half-frozen little woman in their arms, with a fervent thank God for finding her alive. The young husband took her on his horse, and as she was so weak and exhausted, they stopped at the first house to which they came. It proved to be the home of a widow who lived with her son on the outskirts of town. Here she was tenderly nursed and petted by the dear old lady, and it was she who christened her the Stormy Petrel. I'll be back here on Wednesday for another story. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads. I hope you enjoyed it.